The very first historical description of warfare described surprise, right? Surprise is about unpredictability. That was a war that happened up in Palestine, essentially. So just to make another current thing, and that was many, many thousands of years ago. It has always been central, and that's because our brains latch on to surprise and unpredictability.
Well, but let's return now to Venezuela. The deposed president, Nicolas Maduro, is due to appear before judges in New York today. His deputy, Delcy Rodriguez, will be sworn in as his replacement. Donald Trump has said that she could pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro, if she doesn't do what's right. Here's the US president speaking to reporters on Air Force One as he returned to Washington about the possibility of a second strike on the country.
We were prepared to do a second strike if we needed. We're totally prepared.
But that's off the table.
We're still prepared.
That's off the table now.
No, it's not. If they don't behave, we will do a second strike.
Will you demand
The question is that the American troops, are they going to be on the ground? They're doing any kind of peacekeeping? I think Americans are very...
It depends on what happens. It depends a little bit on the new administration, if you want to call it.
Well, he's also made threatening noises towards Colombia, Cuba, Iran, Mexico, and he said the US needs Greenland for national security. He continues to be predictably unpredictable, to say the least. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Nicholas Wright. He's a neuroscientist and author of Warhead, How the Brain Shapes War and War Shapes the Brain. He's advised both the Pentagon and the British government, and you may remember him speaking to us before on Times Radio. Nicholas, hello.
Hi, Hugo. Thanks so much for having me again.
Thanks for being with us. Look, you're the man we turn to try and understand the president's brain. Is Donald Trump uniquely unpredictable as a world leader?
No. He is not uniquely unpredictable. If you think about Vladimir Putin, for example, that is a guy who spent many years, there was the famous press conference where George W. Bush said, I've looked into his eyes and I see he's a guy I can do business with, essentially. And then, of course, he turns around and sends little green men in 2014 into Ukraine. He is happy to oversee poisonings literally on the soil of another nuclear power, that's the United Kingdom. And he obviously launched the largest war seen in Europe since 1945. And now, that is a lot of people would not have predicted that, right? Angela Merkel, for example, famously said, he's living in another world, right? After you spoke to him. Well, sadly for her and for a lot of us, it was him who's living in the world that many other people are living in, and it was her type of ideas which were very nice, they were very kind. I was listening to Emily Thornberry shortly before we came on. All of that is great, but that is not how a lot of other people in the world operate. And that is not how Donald Trump operates. That is not how Xi Jinping operates. That is not how Vladimir Putin operates. And we are going to have to adjust to operating in that kind of world, because unpredictability and using unpredictability has always been a crucial weapon in grey zone conflicts. So that's something between peace and war. In warfare, I just came back from Egypt. The very first historical description of warfare described surprise, right? Surprise is about unpredictability. That was a war that happened up in Palestine, essentially. So just to make another current thing, and that was many, many thousands of years ago. It has always been central, and that's because our brains latch on to surprise and unpredictability.
Well, let's talk about that then. So if we can't understand Donald Trump's brain, let's try and understand our own brains. From a psychological perspective, from a brain perspective, how does a sudden move like the one Donald Trump has done, how does that affect allies and opponents? I mean, I mentioned earlier on he's been making threats towards Colombia, Cuba, Iran, Mexico, even Denmark. What's happening in their brains now with that new threat?
I mean, we can understand a lot about what's happening in his brain because he has a human brain, right? I know a lot of people don't think Donald Trump is human, but he is a human. He has a human brain, the same type of brain as you and me and every listener out there, right?
But bigger and better. The biggest, the best.
If you ask him, it would be a golden brain,
Yes.
probably. Although there is actually literally an award called the Golden Brain, which my former PhD supervisor many years ago won. But I'll leave that for another day.
Yeah.
So everyone's brain, the way our brains work is that they are constantly making predictions about the world. Right, we are trying to anticipate what's going to happen. Right, and the reason for that is that you want to, the classic thing in ice hockey, for example, you skate to where the puck is going, right, not to where the puck is now. That's how we do everything, right? When we're crossing the road, making a cup of tea, whatever it is we're doing, we're anticipating how the world is going to work, and we're constantly doing that in everything we do. We're interacting with other human beings, for example. Now, how do we learn? How do we change our models of the world? These models that are making these predictions all the time about other people, about physical things in the world, about everything that's going on. We change our models when our models are wrong, okay? So then our models have a prediction about the world, an expectation, and when that model is wrong, that's an error, a prediction error. And that prediction error okay, that prediction error is a learning signal. It tells you your model is wrong and you need to change what you're doing. Right?
Are we resistant to that? Because I'm thinking, like, at the moment, specifically with this, a lot of us like to think that we live in a world governed by rules, by an international order, by international law. Are we resistant to? Do we push back against this? Because perhaps the lesson we should be learning now is that's no longer true, but we don't want to believe that.
That's not correct either. So there are always rules, sets of rules by which we live our lives. Right? You and I'm not going to come around now and steal the money out of your wallet if you have a wallet on you, or take your phone right now, because that is just simply not the way. I don't see that as an option within the society, within the group of humans which we're operating out. There are many things we can do, we do not do them. Right. We literally don't even see them as possibility. So we always work within sets of rules, and it's exactly the same thing in international relations. There will always be sets of rules. Right. During the Cold War, for example, people say, "Oh, there's been this international order since 1945." Well, the Soviet Union never really believed in the international order as understood by the United States, did it? So there were always competing sets of rules. There were competing sets of rules in the 19th century. There were competing sets of rules in World War II. Right. There will always be competing sets of rules. The question is, what are those rules? So listening again to Emily Thornberry, she's just simply, it would be lovely if she were correct, but she's not correct, right? International law is just another set of rules. Our brains will always operate with cultures, with sets of rules. One set of rules was a set of rules that we had in the in many ways, the best bit of history between 1989, the end of the Cold War, and about 2014, right? But we're no longer living in that nicest bit of history. There are still rules. There are still rules of the road. They're just different rules of the road now. And if you are in Latin America, for example, and you're thinking of the Monroe Doctrine, right, and the Trump corollary, which is that can also include. So the Monroe Doctrine is the idea that the United States dominates the whole of the Americas. Right? No, the Monroe Doctrine is specific to the Americas. It was Monroe in the 1820s. Who was a US president. He said, "We are in charge of all of the Americas." Right, and the recent national security strategy from the United States that came out in early December said we are going back to the Monroe Doctrine, and there's the Trump corollary, which is basically making it a bit more sophisticated, involving things like supply chains and so on, and border controls and so on. And those are the rules. They are trying to change the rules of the road to make those the new rules of the road, and that's just the way it is. That's the rules always change, and this is the new set of rules. And we, as Britain, for example, are going to have to work out how we operate in this new world where there are new sets of rules.
Finally, Nicholas, how do our brains respond when confronted with power? With powerful individuals, because Donald Trump, he obviously sees the world as not just in his own backyard. He thinks all powerful nations should control their own backyards. Basically, seems to be what he thinks. How do the rest of us respond in our brains when confronted with power, confronted with somebody we're slightly frightened of, who we think we're going to have to work around?
I mean, it is the classic thing that how does one man, like your Xi Jinping, one man. And he is a single individual. He's the most powerful leader of China since Mao Zedong died in the early mid-1970s. And he is in charge of 1,350 million people. Right? How is that possible? How can one man lead 100 men or 1,000 men or 10 men, or one woman lead 5 people, right? Or 50,000 people? The simple fact is that we as humans, and the way our brains work, is we will always have social structures, right? And those are hierarchical, in which there are people who are more important and people who are less important. There are leaders and there are followers, right? That is simply a fact about how our brains work, right? That's not the only thing. There will always be mutinies. There will always be people. There will always be other leaders who want to take control. You see this now. What are we saying with Venezuela, right? It's how will the different power centers, different leaders of the military, of the economic sphere within Venezuela.
How will they all slot into place?
Who will come out on top, right? Mao Zedong, for example, came out on top. He left the Long March, right? This is this hugely long. 90% of the force he was with died or left or fled, right? He entered that Long March in the mid-1930s as one amongst many leaders, and he ended it as the paramount leader, right? There will always be leaders and there will always be followers. Leadership comes through 2 main things. Dominance. I'm the guy or woman who is bigger, more powerful. I have more guns. I have more authority, right? That's one way of doing it. Another way is prestige. I'm very good at stuff, right? So, for example, Donald Trump now has both those sources of power. He's obviously powerful. He has, right, Delta Force that literally could go in without a seemingly loss of any US life and take Nicolas Maduro. Absolutely, technically, an excellent piece of, military operation, right? He has that kind of power. In addition to that, he's obviously a very good politician, right? But I remember back in 2016, the guy's luck. It's luck that he won the election. He's obviously a very skilled politician.
Can't keep being luck, yeah.
He has prestige now as well as someone who can make a series of very adroit choices. And so from that, he is at the top of the US pyramid. There are people at the top of the Russian pyramid and the Chinese pyramid. And that is always the way it's going to be in human societies.
Dr. Nicholas Wright, author of Warhead, How the Brain Shapes War and War Shapes the Brain. Always a pleasure. Thanks very much for being with us.